am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interview Sharon Bryson, the CEO of the North Carolina Association of CPAs. Sharon works closely with the board of directors and the executive committee to help set the direction of the association. In addition to working with the North Carolina CPA Taxation Committee, she also represents the membership with the North Carolina State Board of CPA Examiners, the North Carolina Department of Revenue, the North Carolina General Assembly, and various other advocacy entities. She is a past president of the Association Executives of North Carolina and currently serves as a member of the AICPA National Commission on Diversity and Inclusion, the North Carolina State Masters of Accounting Advisory Board, the Lewisburg College Board of Trustees, the ECU Accounting Advisory Board, and the ECU College of Business Advisory Board. In her spare time, she enjoys volunteer work focusing on adoption. She's received both her undergraduate and graduate degrees from the University of North Carolina and is an avid Tar Heel fan. During my interview with Sharon, we talk about her journey from being a teacher to her 35-year career with the North Carolina Association of CPAs. We discussed the learning that she has had along the way as a leader by creating relationships with members and the outside advice she has looked to help her in succeeding in the role she is in today. Hi, I am here with this episode of the Breaking Beliefs podcast at the North Carolina CPA Society Professional Women's Conference. And I'm here with the CEO of the North Carolina Society. And would you like to give a little background on yourself before we begin?
Sure, Amy. My name is Sharon Bryson, and as Amy said, I'm the CEO of NCACPA, and have been with the organization for 35 years in a variety of roles, and am obviously happy doing what I'm doing because I have stayed.
That's awesome.
Here I am.
So great to have you on, and especially having become a woman CEO in the space at the time that you did is very inspiring as well. So definitely want to hear your journey. But before we get to that,
sure,
I'd love to know, just starting backward, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a teacher.
Okay.
I grew up in a family of educators. My father was my high school principal.
Really?
And my mother was a teacher. My grandmother was a teacher. And so it was always about lifelong learning in our household. And I wanted to be a teacher. And at one point, I remember having a conversation with my mom about that. And she said, well, there are so many professions you can engage in, and you can be a teacher. It can go it can be the traditional route, or you can look at other possibilities. And so that's what I did.
Yeah. So what did you go to school for then?
My undergraduate degree was in communications.
Okay.
And my graduate degree was in educational media and instructional design.
Okay.
So my first job was designing patient education materials for dialysis patients.
Oh, okay.
And so that was a very intense experience, but one that I enjoyed a great deal.
Wow. So how did you end up going from that to joining the North Carolina CPA Society?
I left the hospital unit, and because I found myself taking those situations home with me, and it was difficult.
Intense.
And yeah, very. And so then I went to work for a little while in adult education, night school, if you will.
Okay.
In our Wake County Community Schools here in North Carolina. And I enjoyed that. and also did some part-time work at a television station in Raleigh, WRAL, and enjoyed that as well. But I still, things
Felt something was off.
hadn't clicked, and I think it was that educational piece. And my college roommate called me and said, there's a position open at the North Carolina Association of CPAs in membership in public relations, and you might want to take a look at it. And the reason she knew about that, she owned a video production company and had done some work for NCACPA.
Oh, okay.
And so it was just luck of the draw, so to speak. And so I thought, well, I'll apply for this.
Yeah.
And interviewed and was hired, and the rest is history.
So how did you, so it's membership, which
Correct.
So were you using your educational background in order to sell? Because that's really at the end of the day a sales job.
Yeah.
It's different, right?
Exactly. There was a lot of education that needed to go on about what the association did, because I realized very quickly that most of our members didn't know.
Right.
And so it was absolutely educational in nature. I also realized early in my career that we could design all kinds of materials, but there was nothing more effective than face-to-face communication.
Yes, absolutely. So how did your journey happen then so even starting out, you hadn't really been part of CPA associations or around accountants. So when you came into it, what were you thinking about accountants that maybe you started changing your mind or had different observations later?
Great question. Long answer.
That's
I'll try to shorten it.
Yeah.
When I started there, I didn't think I would be there long.
Yeah.
Because I didn't find the relationship aspect of it to be as positive as I wanted it to be.
Right.
And so my father, in his infinite wisdom, said, if I know anything about you, Sharon, you're a people person.
Yes.
And you may be working around, dare I say it, curmudgeons at this point, who don't think you know a lot about the profession, but what they don't know is that you are a people person, and that's, again, the heart and soul of an association. Mm-hmm. It's typically the heart and soul of any business, for that matter. But he said, I'm going to suggest, and I was 6 months into it at this point. Yeah. He said, I'm going to suggest you give it a year. And he said, your mom and I don't want you to be unhappy, but give that some thought. So thankfully I took that advice, and he was absolutely right. I started developing relationships, and I wasn't waiting for it to happen. I took the initiative to do that. And by the end of that 12 months, I thought, these are great people. And they have such a passion for what they do.
Yes.
And because I care about them, I care about their issues. And that was the beginning of me realizing that association management was a wonderful, wonderful profession.
Isn't that interesting? And it really, what you're talking about is an example of mindfulness practices, because a lot of times we have perceived opinions, or, immediately we're impacted by someone's outward way that they communicate or they behave. And when we don't get present and actually pull out, let me have compassion for what they're saying and what they're doing, it starts changing the conversation, and just that was one thing. And then the second thing you said that I think is really important is a lot of times we assume we don't like something, and we don't step back and go, well, how could I use my best skills at this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's really cool that your father was able to help shift that perspective. Well, and your mom shifted your perspective too by saying learning's everything.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah. So then what happened after that?
Well, the longer I was there, the more I enjoyed it. And so that membership and public relations position then morphed into director of communications, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And then I was asked to be the director of education. And that was an area that I knew not so much about, but I took the opportunity. I turned it down.
Yeah, really?
And then I thought, they came back to me and asked me again.
Yeah.
And I thought, I need to give this a go, because at that point I had decided that association management was for me, and it gave me an opportunity to learn a whole new phase. And what I learned running the educational program, I mean, I was running a small business.
Right.
With a beginning, middle, and end to all of our initiatives. And that was probably the most significant training ground for me. Frankly, it was also when I learned how to negotiate, because you're working with vendors, you're working with speakers.
Yeah.
And the power of negotiation is so important. And I also learned how to draw a line in the sand, because there were times when that financial piece, I saw aspects of people that I didn't find attractive.
Right.
And I learned how to draw that line in the sand, and I stood my ground, and I wanted to be treated like a professional.
Right.
And I certainly wanted to reciprocate. And so that was a big training ground for me. I enjoyed that very much. We had a very successful run, and our educational program is still known for its very high quality. And after a number of years in that role, I was asked to become the COO, Chief Operating Officer, and again, enjoyed that a great deal. And the CEO role was, I guess, about 3.5 years ago now that I was asked to serve in that role.
Yeah.
So I've been incredibly fortunate to have so many different opportunities in an organization that I love.
Now, you made the comment that you turned down the role first. Was there someone looking out for you or telling you go for it? Like, what was happening during that time that actually made you take the leap or convinced you to take the leap?
That's another great question. I was actually having dinner with one of my really good friends, and I was telling her the story. And she said, have you really thought that through? I said, what do you mean? And she said, why did you say no? And I said, I'm not sure I'm up for it.
Right.
I'm not sure I want to learn something at this point from beginning to end. And she said, if not now, when would be a better time?
That's a great question.
And I had no answer. And she's the reason that I turned no into yes.
Wow. That's very powerful.
And I've thought about that question many times since.
Yeah.
I'm not good at no. I'm not good at saying that. But it's something that, again, that question helped me.
If not now, when?
Get rid of the filters that I was creating.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's true for a lot of women that if we don't feel like we hit all the check marks, of what the job entails, then we don't go for it, rather than taking the opportunity when it's right there to help advance us and realize that we're actually, everybody that takes the next job is learning in that job.
And I have found that story has been impactful when I talk to people on our team who are starting a new role. Yeah. Because again, at that point in my life, I did not want to engage in that vulnerability. Right. And I just didn't have the self-confidence to say I don't know anything about this, but I knew I could learn.
Do you say that now? If you don't know something?
If I don't know something, I do push myself, because it's part of the journey. Right. It's part of the journey.
So the transition from being, a subject matter expert, as you go into these different roles, and then to a leadership role, you start you still have to be an expert in what you do, but once you're a leader, you're a people leader. It becomes about the team. So what had to change in your style of the way you viewed work once you got into even the COO role?
Right. I would like to tell you that I did not learn some of those lessons the hard way, but indeed I did. I think the most impactful thing for me is that I have always thought I was a good listener.
Mm-hmm.
And through some 360 feedback, actually when I became the CEO, I learned that I had a blind spot there.
Really?
That instead of engaging in active listening, I would listen and then I would become empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, I would start saying, well, yes, I've had that experience.
Yeah.
And I would share my experience. And what I learned is that that's not the thing to do.
Yeah.
That my role is to listen and listen only.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that certainly doesn't mean that I don't provide feedback. You know, I answer questions, but I feel like leadership is largely about listening.
Yeah, and I would agree, because I think a lot of times people come to you with their problems and you're trying to solve it and they're like, well, that won't work, or that won't work. And then you realize they just wanted to tell you. They didn't want you to solve it. They just wanted to get it off their chest, and then they actually felt better that someone heard them.
Right. That's so true. And I also think that, and I've certainly not perfected the art of active listening, but I work on that every day. And I also believe very strongly in the power of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we learn so much about ourselves and about each other through that form of communication.
So how do you do that?
Well, I would say that when I am listening to someone and I have something to say, I'm trying, work in progress.
It's a journey. Yeah.
Work in progress. I'm trying to, instead of coming out with a number of declarative statements,
Right.
I'm just trying to ask questions, and that enables me to learn, but it also enables the person I'm talking to, the person I'm listening to say more.
Right.
Which is 9 times out of 10 what they really need.
Yeah.
And that's true for our team members. It's also true for the members of our association.
Yes.
I was talking to a member the other day who said, you know, I appreciate you listening to me because I've come to my own solution. And if I can do that for someone and provide certainly periodic input,
Right.
because they have questions for me too.
Yeah.
But that's been very effective.
Yeah.
And it's all I care.
Right.
I care. Now
Yeah.
I'm not lathered up about generally accepted accounting principles, but I care about what they care about.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
From a
wanna be
personal
authentic.
standpoint.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Exactly. It's human, right?
Correct.
No matter what your profession. So you had said before that you have trouble because you do say yes
Mm-hmm.
too much. So where do you notice that the most, and how have you tried to work on that?
Well, I work with
And by the way, I pushed her to do the podcast and she said yes.
well, I'll tell you when you got me there. You started talking about other possibilities.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's not going to materialize.
Yeah.
This
It'd
is
be better if
this
we
is
do
the
it right
easiest
now.
way. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, goodness. It's very much a learning process for me. I'm actually, for the last couple of years, been working with an executive coach.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an area where she is mandating that when I say yes to something new, she wants to know what's coming off the list.
Yes.
And so that may sound simple,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like a closet, you know.
Yeah.
Let's
What else is in there?
That's
Yeah.
right, that's right. But I'm very intentional, much more intentional now about what I say yes to. And I do try to abandon something.
And how does that make you feel?
It's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It is difficult in the interim
Yes.
until I get to the point where I've been able to say no
Yeah.
and
And mean
explain
it.
why and mean it.
Yeah.
That's right. And so when I get to that finish line,
Mhm.
I feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And I remind myself that if I don't if something doesn't leave the plate, nothing else can be added. And it goes back to that lifelong learning piece.
Right.
I have to make room.
Yeah.
I have to make room. And so
Yeah.
again, I haven't perfected it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's hard because you don't want to disappoint people.
Correct.
Very much as a CEO, that's a people-pleasing position as well as hard decision making. But
Right.
from a human perspective, it's hard.
Yes.
And when you're having to say no, you're taking it from a personal standpoint. And I think sometimes we have to realize like that other person might not be taking it as personally as we're internalizing it, right? Because we want to be everything.
That is very true. I was saying no to someone the other day and they said, well, you don't need to be at these meetings. You can just be there when I let you know that it's imperative.
Right.
And I said, that doesn't work for me.
Right.
I'm either all in or not.
Right. Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so, I did stick to my guns on that one.
Yeah.
But I also think that it's very important to role model
Mm-hmm.
the word no.
Yes.
Because if you don't, you're not illustrating to your team members that, I mean, they need to know it's okay to say no.
Yeah.
They need to know it's okay to say no to me.
Yes. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I'm trying to get much better at that.
Yeah. But I mean, it's definitely a hard thing, to work through, and you have to, just like any kind of change, you have to practice it. Like
Correct.
you have to be intentionally
Right.
practicing it and
Right.
knowing when you get off. And I think it's important also that you brought up that you meet with an executive coach, that a lot of people can look at that as a weakness. Like, I wouldn't go to a therapist, or like having that third party there that can actually help you see things that you're not seeing, or like, just like a workout coach
Right.
is saying, so did you stay on your no diet?
Right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
That is very true. I was doing a presentation on Friday for the Dental Society in North Carolina, and I mentioned my coach.
Yeah.
And not by name, but I just referenced that I was working with one. And I received an email from a woman in the audience who said, I'm struggling with some things right now from a business perspective. And so would you be willing to share more about your experience with me? And so I appreciated that question and was happy to pass that along, because we all need somebody in our corner.
Yeah, exactly.
Not that she tells me what I want to hear.
Yeah.
Because that's not the point.
No, but I think being a CEO especially, it's a lonely position.
Right. And I hate cliches, but lonely.
Well, you have to
is the
make
right word.
really hard decisions, and a lot of times people don't understand all the factors that went into making a decision.
Right.
Even if you try to explain it, they're not sitting in your shoes.
Right.
Trying to make
Right.
that decision.
Right.
So having someone you can talk to versus putting that on somebody else that works with you is an important thing.
Right. And of course, we have amazing volunteer leaders. Our executive committee and our board members are always available to listen.
Yes.
And for me to ask questions and to get input in specific areas, but they stay in the strategic lane.
Yeah.
As opposed to the operational lane, and that's a good delegation of responsibility.
So do you create kind of that, without intentionally, like a personal board where like there's certain people to go to over and over that help you with thinking through decisions like that?
Well, I think it certainly depends on the subject matter. In my 35-year career, I have there's absolutely no doubt that some of our volunteer leaders have become mentors for me.
Mm-hmm.
I respect their professionalism to the highest level, and that's been a major benefit to me.
So how do you think being a woman in this role has affected, good and bad, of you taking on the position and as you interact with people?
I guess I would say that as a result of being in the organization for so long, I have from time to time felt that I was putting unnecessary pressure on myself because of my gender. And I say unnecessary because that is absolutely the truth.
Right.
I don't have anything that I feel like I need to prove because of my gender. I certainly needed to prove when I became the CEO that I would give it everything I had. And that's been true with every role that I've had at the association. I often find myself to be the minority in the room from a gender perspective, but I may notice that, but I don't feel like that changes my communication style. I don't feel like I haven't been given opportunities because I am a female. I think that there have been a couple of occasions when the expectations might have been different. And I didn't care for that.
Yeah.
And I've had some conversations along those lines in a very professional way.
So how did you go about that? Because I think it's important for women to know how to handle that in the right way.
I was direct. I asked questions because I wanted to make sure that I was dealing with the facts at hand.
Yeah, and not perceiving something that wasn't
exactly.
there. Yeah,
and that went well because the individual I was speaking with said, "I'm going to shoot straight with you," and we got to the bottom of the issue, and he ended up thanking me for sticking to my guns and asking questions as opposed to being accusatory. But I also made my point.
Yeah.
I also made my point.
Yeah.
And I had rehearsed. I was prepared.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was extremely important.
Really important.
Yeah. And so I think preparation, I took emotionalism out of it.
Yes.
I gave myself some time to get from where I was to where I needed to be.
Right.
And it went well.
Yeah, and I think we have to remember we don't have to respond right away.
Right. Right. Which is my tendency.
Yeah. Mine too. Yeah.
Yes.
You have to practice it like that. You're
right.
not going to respond right away.
That's right.
Yeah. You take the information and figure out what to do with it.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think, when you're at these women's conferences, I hear that complaint over and over is they think I'm complaining. If I act the same way as them, they look at me as, different and that sort of thing. And it's like, it's really maneuvering and trying different ways to approach a situation. And not every person is that going to work with, but
that's right.
But I think an important piece you said was practice it. Like,
yes.
Understand how you want that conversation, picture it, visualize it before you go into it.
I heard one of our team members say the other day, we were talking about practicing feedback in our office.
Yeah.
Through a SBI model, subject behavior impact model. And this team member was saying that in schools today, that instead of teaching kids that practice makes perfect, it's practice makes progress. And I love that. I love that because it has such a, taking that perfectionist word out, I think is very healthy. But yeah, practice is extremely important. And I think that one of the things that led me to making sure that I said what I needed to say, was driving home from work. This was a number of years ago, and I'd had a situation, if you will. And I was driving home and I was having the conversation with the person in my car. And of course that person wasn't in the car.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is crazy.
Right.
This is crazy. You can't take this home.
And you're internalizing, which creates stress.
Precisely. And so I've never done that since. Never.
Yeah.
Ever.
And if you catch yourself. Yeah.
So I really don't remember a time in my professional life or my personal life for that matter when a conversation didn't make it better.
Right. Exactly. I love that. Yeah. So I like to end with some rapid fire questions.
Sure.
So you pick a category.
Okay.
So either family and friends, spiritual, health, or money?
Health.
Okay. So things or actions that I don't have that I want with my health.
A more regular exercise routine.
Is there a type of exercise you like?
I love Pilates. That's probably my
favorite thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So things or actions that I do have that I want. So you want to keep it.
In the subject of health, I will tell you that when I was 16 years old, I didn't think this was a blessing, but it's been a blessing in disguise. And it's the regiment that I've lived for the last 4 decades as an insulin-dependent diabetic.
Really?
And so what I have in that area that I want to keep, again, in the health world,
right,
is my my regimen, my routine.
Yeah.
And I have to keep it.
Yeah.
But I also want to keep it.
Well, and I love that, turning something that's hard into the benefits that it's giving in your life. Yeah.
Routine's not bad.
Okay, so things or actions I don't have that I don't want with my health.
That I don't have that I don't want. I don't want to cheat. I don't want to, have that piece of candy over there.
It's so tempting. Halloween's horrible.
It is a tough time of year.
Yeah. So, is there anything that you want to make sure people leave with your message or about the North Carolina CPA Society as we wrap up this conversation?
Being here today at this professional women's conference, I'm so grateful to represent the profession I represent. I'm so grateful to represent the people that I do, and I'm just the energy here.
Yeah,
you can feel it, you can touch it,
mm-hmm.
And I'm just happy to be part of an organization that has that vibe.
Yeah. Well, and the team and you that have created it.
Well, so, I'm surrounded by incredible people, both in the office and then when I come out and see the members, it's always a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
And so it feeds me.
Yeah, it keeps you going for 35 years and more. Keep going. So thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
And now for our Mindful Moments segment, where we can take a moment to just step back and pause and think back on the conversation that you just heard with Sharon. And I'll give you a few learnings that I had along the way. And I think one of the biggest learnings is no matter what technology you put in place and what systems you put in place and what business processes you put in place, as Sharon discussed, the most important thing is creating those face-to-face relationships, however you do it. It could be virtually, it could be in person, but figuring out in all of our roles, how do we create that personal connection? And when we create that personal connection, it actually shifts how we feel about the work that we do. And she talked about how originally in her job with the North Carolina CPA Society, that she actually wasn't connecting with it until she took that moment to step back and realize that if she makes the effort, if she makes that shift in really taking the time to get to know the people that she's serving, that all of a sudden her work had more meaning for her. And I think we can take that into any job that we do. Is a lot of times we think about our job in a silo and the work that we're doing as just an individual piece of work. But how do we go and reach out to the rest of the organization or reach out to customers and actually make those connections so that our work has a broader meaning? It's not just the day-to-day that we do. Now, another area that we talked about was where she said no to a position that she didn't have the skills to do when the education role came up. And her reflection on saying no, where it was really that she kind of didn't feel like pushing herself or learning a new thing at that point in her career. And what she realized from her friend who gave her that epiphany is that if you don't do it now, then what is the alternative? What do you want to do in your future? And actually answering that. And a lot of times we think about the moment, but we don't necessarily give ourselves a broader definition of why we just did what we did, and to really internalize it so that we can figure out, does it make sense? And that one sentence that her friend said to her, if not now, when would be a better time, really had her step back and pause and think about, well, this position might not come up again. And if I don't take advantage of it, then I could lose out. And we talked about this because when we take on new positions, a lot of times we expect to have that checklist and automatically be ready for that next new position. But if we've never done a job before, we shouldn't expect to be perfect at it walking into it. But what we do need to think about is, how do we go about learning that role? How are we open to letting people know that we may not know what we're doing and we need their help along the way to learn the process? And as we've taken in those observations, then we can start better designing what the future of that role would look like with you in it. Doesn't mean it has to look exactly like the last person. And we also talked about her shift from moving from an expert to a people leader, and how she has worked to become a better listener. And this is really important because we can think that we are a good listener. And like she said, that she felt she was a good listener, but what she realized was she was interrupting too many times or giving her story back to another person. And when we're truly listening, we are not interjecting our own story or our point of view, that we are open and observing that person in their individuality and just being completely present for what they need at that moment. And having compassion for them as we have that conversation. So how do we actually practice active listening? Because it's a skill. And we need to practice it and make sure that we achieved what we wanted to achieve out of that conversation, and not make statements, like she said, declarative statements. Instead, we want to encourage them to keep talking more and to say more. And a lot of times just by them talking, they get out what they need. But also you learn so much more about their thought process, about their emotions and their feelings. You can step back from that conversation and then decide what may be the right step forward. She also talked about going to an executive coach. And I think this is really important because a lot of times executive coaches may be used in the wrong way in organizations, because it could be used as a correctional thing rather than looked at as, in any role that we're in, sometimes we need that independent third party to give us an independent view on our stories. Because we get wrapped up in the corporate culture, and it's important for someone, when we're telling those stories, to question and to see if there was another way we could have gone about it. And one of the things that she's realized about herself is she says yes too much. And I think that practice that she brought up of, when you say yes, what will you say no to? That you don't keep filling your plate and then letting it overflow, because what that does is create stress internally, and you're probably not putting out the energy that you want to create for the people around you. Instead, you are stressed out, and that's going to show up in other ways when you're communicating with people as well. And I think the third really big point in this was talking about having difficult conversations. And a couple great tips that she had was about making sure you visualize and practice what you want to say before you go into that meeting, so that you come in prepared and can't be taken off guard. Now, obviously you can't, prepare for every kind of nuance that might happen, but how do you take the emotion out of it and come back to that active listening with the other person and really try to hear what their perspective is, even if you don't agree with it? This is hard. I know it's hard, but how do we take the information that they are providing us and then synthesize it and not necessarily give an answer right away? So I think with these great tips, it's important for us to realize that we might get promoted based on our expertise, but we're not always given the right kind of coaching to become a people leader and practice in doing it as well. So think about, as you leave this podcast, what could you do, whether you're a leader or a coworker, to really think about how do you start improving some of those communication skills? What kind of learning could you commit to this year so that you can change the energy that you are putting out to the people around you and create the kind of experience that you want to create? Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.